All right. Welcome back to another day. Today I wanted to talk about anti-Semitism and how it is being driven in the United States and the West, and how it is used as a tool for the Zionist plot to continue expanding Israel in the Middle East. And that kind of brings us into Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes has been a vocal opponent to Israel, but he's also been a vocal opponent to anybody who's not a Christian nationalist. And I believe that Nick Fuentes is a Fed. I believe he's an asset. He's been co-opted, and he is being supported in everything he does. Actually, after I got off my stream last night, I got into it with somebody because I believe Nick Fuentes is a Fed. I got into it with somebody about that. And basically how I'm pushing out people that support a similar cause, but that's not the case. Nick Fuentes has this very specific purpose, and that's to drive up anti-Semitism in the United States and to get the MAGA community and anybody who's just vulnerable into needing somebody to guide them in the process. That's what Nick Fuentes serves. So, but Nick Fuentes recently went on Piers Morgan, and so he's in the mainstream. But there's a lot of people, specifically last night, somebody said to me that I'm not, unless you're canceled, I don't want to hear what you have to say, and I don't believe you. But here's the thing, Nick Fuentes isn't canceled. Yes, he doesn't have an Instagram account, but that's by design. You can spend an entire day on Instagram and you're going to see a ton of Nick Fuentes videos. So his content's not being throttled by any means. It's being promoted. It's just not being promoted by his channel because he doesn't have a channel on Instagram. But he's by no means being suppressed. Not in the same way that the Gazan unalivement is being suppressed. If you had looked up or opened Instagram a year ago, Eye on Palestine was posting actively atrocities happening in Israel. And now you can't find content like that. It's a lot harder. But you have no issue finding content of Candace Owens, Nick Fuentes, or Tucker Carlson. All of these people who are apparently rebels in the movements. I'm not sure who Paul Miller is, but remind me of that after I wrap this up, and we'll dig into Paul Miller a little bit. But I really wanted to use this time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to use this time to really talk about anti-Semitism. What Theodore Herzl, Max Nordau, and Jabotinsky's view of anti-Semitism was, and how anti-Semitism was a vehicle for Zionism to justify mass exodus of Jews who didn't want to leave their homeland. I said this last night. You have Germans. They're Germans first, and they're Jewish second. And a lot of times people were considered German because Theodore Herzl said your mom was a Jew, therefore you're a Jew. But that is a Zionist definition of what makes somebody a Jew. But basically, so Nick Fuentes, he's being accepted by a lot of the truthers as somebody bringing forth some sort of revealing knowledge, and that's not the case. And we'll talk about the fallout of that. And the fallout of Nick Fuentes going on Piers Morgan is this new bill that came out, Senate Resolution 533, and we'll go over this too. But I just want to first, let's look at briefly the Piers Morgan Uncensored that has Nick Fuentes. We're not going to watch the whole thing because it's like 2 hours, and you guys can watch it yourself if you want. It's really easy to find. I just Googled it. But we'll get the gist. We'll get the gist of what the purpose this serves by the way Piers Morgan introduces him. But this is a psyop all the way through. The fact that he's on Piers Morgan Uncensored, it means it's a part of the psyop. And I truly do believe Nick is a Fed, and he knows he's a Fed. But we can't forget that throughout history, MoMA, I think it was the Institute of Multimedia and Arts, something like that, but it was co-opted by the CIA. And they had people push their agenda unwittingly, and then these artists found out that they were actually being funded by CIA assets, and there was this huge fallout because they had no idea. Their entire following was artificial. It wasn't organic, and it kind of ruined a lot of artists. And you can look that up, but it's just MoMA and the CIA. You can find a ton of it. And JSTOR has a ton of worthwhile information on that. But without further ado, let's skip through this Piers Morgan, Nick Fuentes interview real quick. And things we're going to look for is how Piers Morgan introduces him and the specific anti-Semitic tropes that that are well known throughout the community, but how they're hollow. Like people. Yes, he's giving us great replacement theory information, but he's not giving us anything. Like Nick Fuentes has never mentioned HIAS, which is the Jewish organization that makes sure that immigrants find placements in the United States. So there's, a lot of nothing sandwiches being portrayed. But without further ado, and the context that I've established, let's check this out just for a second.
You're a New York Times reader, an NPR fan, a Daily Wire subscriber, or an avid consumer of all things Tucker Carlson. For several months now, there's been no avoiding the subject of Nick Fuentes. And let's be clear, the main reason you're hearing about him is because he's popular. A large number of people, especially young men, are interested in what he has to say. What that says about our society and our culture is the subject of ferocious debate. For many people, it's a grave indictment of an insidious immorality. For others, he's a product of a culture which has turned on its own and left many young people feeling listless and bitter. He's either a litmus test for right-wing hypocrisy on free speech or a walking, talking manifestation of where the lines should be drawn. And a frankly preposterous amount of airtime has been spent on debating everything from his ideology to his sexuality and whether anyone should actually talk to him at all.
If I were writing a glossary entry on the Streisand effect, I wouldn't put a picture of her next to it. I would put a picture of Nick Fuentes.
They have opted to not do so when it comes to Nazis like Nick Fuentes.
Fuentes takes this guy apart brick by brick. It's a full takedown.
My concern is that people who are a bit more moderate are deeply...
Dude, I actually have so I have another account that I use a little bit. It's Divergent Media, but I actually posted some videos of HIAS. So it's crazy. People go to my account when I'm like debating them and they're like, oh, you have a degree in Jewish studies. That says everything. It's like, what? It says that I'm fucking informed? Like, come on now.
Alarmed by Nick Fuentes.
I was very happy to see that Nick Fuentes really passed that test with flying colors.
That fragmentation is being caused purposefully by a splinter faction of people led by a young man named Nick Fuentes.
See, Ben Shapiro gives us all a shred of evidence right there. It is a splinter group being led by Nick Fuentes, but who is leading him? Who's writing his paycheck? Why does he have millions of dollars? Why does his podcast look like the same level as Ben Shapiro's? That takes money. That takes time. And the only reason I have any of this equipment that I have is because I've spent probably a decade hoarding musical production equipment, and some of it just happens to fit the same need as a podcast. So a lot of the shit I use, I'm a cheap-ass mofo.
The war. Can you get the beef prices down? Not crazy things that Nick Fuentes or these other loons say on social media.
Well, it looks like all the screaming about Nick Fuentes on the internet is finally dying down a little bit.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
So now we had on this guy, this Fuentes guy, and never challenged him.
You should have Nick Fuentes on your show, and you could ask him questions about that.
The truth is, it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend all this time talking about Nick Fuentes, but not actually to Nick Fuentes. People who say you shouldn't give him a platform overlook the very obvious fact that he already has a platform of his own, which is often bigger than most of the people complaining, and he uses it.
And how is his platform of his own as big as it is? All of us are sharing content all the time, but unless you're talking about white nationalism or some sort of visceral anti-Semitism, you're not going to get promoted because there's a need for anti-Semitism.
To speak unchallenged to as many followers. It's on that basis I've invited him to appear live and uncensored on my platform, and Nick Fuentes joins me now. Nick Fuentes, welcome to Uncensored.
We're just gonna watch this first couple seconds here. Oh my God! All right, maybe we'll skip through a little bit. I didn't realize they really gave him a platform by him being on here for 2 hours. As much as they say they don't want to platform him, they've platformed him hard as fuck for every single mainstream boomer to see. And what this is gonna do, you'll see, because that's the thing, is there are people that will not agree with Nick Fuentes, and it's going to be the main body of mainstream Republican consumers. And also liberals, people that still haven't figured it out.
Great to be with you.
I don't know you. I don't think we've ever met. You can correct me if that's wrong. I know about you. I know that increasingly people are talking about you in a more mainstream.
That's the best part, is that people are recycling this clip, but like they're not questioning the source, Like I keep getting a lot of people who are like, you're not discerning what he's saying. Like, yes, he's an asshole, but you're not discerning what he's saying. He's not saying anything. What he's saying is the equivalent of Democrats releasing a bunch of fucking Epstein files that don't implicate anybody,
Environment than you may be used to. So for those who know nothing about Nick Fuentes, I want this to be an opportunity to get to the real person.
Exactly. So they're gonna introduce who he is, and then that Senate resolution bill follows directly after.
I don't know
this.
who that.
So they put him on the platform to provide him an area to air out all this cannon fodder that the politicians are going to use against us.
That person is, but I do want to use this opportunity to get there. I've seen you talk as we prepared for this. In exchanges with people and on your show, saying you fear it's going to be very hostile, it's going to be an ambush, all those kind of things. I don't intend it to be overtly hostile. I don't intend to ambush you. I intend it to be an examination of what you said on the record, an examination of what you believe or what you say you believe, and an examination of what your rising popularity says about the state of the conservative movement in America. So those are my goals from this interview. What are your goals? Why are you doing it?
I thought it'd be interesting. And, you've talked a lot about me on your show over the years, and this is the first time you actually extended the invitation. I think it might be the second, actually. I think we talked about doing it during A24 a few years ago, but you've talked a lot about me with the panel, and now you've extended the invitation to talk to me. And I think it'd be interesting for me to maybe clarify some positions and maybe get to know you a little better as well. So I'm looking forward to it.
There is a belief that you have two personas. There's one that you roll out now for podcasts and for shows like mine, where you come across as reasonable. And then there's your show on Rumble, where you often come across as having, a very unreasonable view on things. This is what Coleman Hughes said about you.
Nick Fuentes knows exactly what he's doing. He is consciously playing this double game as part of a long-term strategy to become popular enough to take the reins of power, at which point he plans to pivot towards the extreme and unpopular policies that he advocates daily on Rumble.
So he's a Fed. That's why, he's flipping script back and forth, because he has different speaking points that are given to him every day. So
first of all, what is your response to that?
Well, first of all, I would say that Coleman Hughes is a propagandist. He works for the Free Press.
A propagandist would call it a propagandist.
Which is run by Barry Weiss. So I think you have to consider the source. And
so all of their bosses are Barry Weiss. But yeah, I agree with that statement that Barry Weiss is a trash-ass propaganda piece. But Nick Fuentes is the exact opposite of that. We have Barry Weiss for liberals that have had a falling out with the Democratic Party. That's what Barry Weiss, that's who she represents. And Nick Fuentes is the exact same version of that, but for MAGA and Republicans. It's QAnon 2.0. Both of these people, it's all idol worship.
And Barry Weiss is a pro-Israel partisan. Free Press is just bought out by CBS for $150 million by Larry Ellison, or his son David Ellison. And so I think that's coming from a particular point of view. We can't pretend like that's coming from a vacuum or from some fixed position. That's coming from a propaganda outlet that's in favor of Israel. That's first. But second, I would say he is right about the two personas. And I think that everybody understands this on some level. On my show, I make jokes and I use rhetoric and I'm hyperbolic because for a long time I had an audience that was small on these like dissident platforms. I was on D Live for many years. A lot of people don't even know what that is. And so I had a small following, and we had sort of like an in-group sense of humor and memes and things like that. And you talk about it one way on a freewheeling, largely white suburb. And
all right, so I'm going to skip through a little bit. We got the gist of it. There's one video that I'm interested in that talks
reveals
about
the brutal truth about
Pierce
your body
Morgan's
that your
questioning where he
regular
got his
scale
money.
will
And Nick
never
is very
tell you.
adamant.
For weeks, my scale showed I
making
wasn't
it clear
losing
that
weight
he's not
despite
taking
diet and
money
in
from
Chicago, everybody was maybe half
external
Catholic, half
sources.
Protestant. It was a baseball town. I played baseball for many years. So I saw it's different immigrants. They're coming from a different place.
To their environment. Right? I've interviewed.
And most of the clients were black. You
you're-
said this. We're looping. You said this
No,
already.
but you haven't really directly, I think, responded to it, which is whether your father would not take you to certain restaurant chains because he associated them with black Americans. Is that true?
No, well, see here, if you're in America, you would say that Olive Garden is not real Italian food. Applebee's, TGI Fridays, the stuff is a load of crap. My dad was just a food snob, but no, it's got nothing to do with that.
People commit murder cases. If you say, or use them, if you say that is not what you meant, that's fine. You can respond.
Black school, it's going to be the Bloods and the Crips. And I'm not a liberal ideologue that says that over time and with enough education, we're all going to see this great brotherhood where we're colorblind and everybody's the same. You know, I don't think that's ever going away. I think that race is real. It's not just skin deep. It matters to us and it matters to each other. And black people know that, and Hispanics know that, and Asians know that, and people like me that have partial Mexican ancestry, we know that too. And I think.
What do you mean by that? Film or a left-wing film? It's a film about transparency. Answered emphatically that you don't hate all Jews. Is that correct? That's your position?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to play you this clip.
Well, I don't hate any Jews. Let me just amend that. I don't hate any Jews.
Okay. Okay. Let's play this clip.
The reason I've had it is because my opposition to world Jewry and Israel is rooted in absolute, uncontestable fact. We have the truth on our side. That's why we're winning, because we are telling the truth.
Who were murdered by the Nazis. It's been said that you believe no more than several 100,000 have been killed. And I want to play you this clip.
People talk about, well, you know, what about the gas chambers? Well, to the extent that that's real, I find that hard to believe, but to the extent that's real, there have been atrocities committed and genocides committed in all times and all places. Let's acknowledge.
And perhaps moderate the number of about the Holocaust. Really, you've talked about this. You've talked about you are the embodiment of a misogynist. It couldn't be clearer. And the Catholic Church thinks all women should be deprived of the vote. You had to sit down with her. Again, this
people's houses. And once said in the first election, which is
torn apart by
sort of anticipated that you would make some choices about how you wanted it to go, and I was fine with it. So I thought it was terrific.
As a Catholic, you're probably aware the Jerusalem Post has recently called on the Pope to openly condemn you. Would it matter to you if the Pope did? He's an American Pope, obviously.
It would be very disheartening, yes.
All right. So we see the allure to Nick Fuentes being in the mainstream because he has a lot of speaking points that align with a lot of people. But at the same time, there's a lot of what he's saying that doesn't mean anything, you know? So, but with that said, on the heels of this, of his debut in the mainstream, immediately after that, we saw this Senate Resolution 533, which came out, and we'll go through this whole list. I think Senator Tammy Baldwin's on here, Elizabeth Warren, so Wisconsin individuals, Mr. Sanders, all these fucking scumbags. But basically, what this bill, let's go through it real quick, just blast through it. Condemning white supremacy, hate, and anti-Semitism. Why does, okay, see, for me, this is the biggest psyop here, is why does anti-Semitism need its own thing? Why can't white supremacy and hate, isn't that enough, you know? But basically, whereas Nick Fuentes is a white supremacist leader, organizer, and a podcaster, whereas Fuentes identifies himself as a white identitarian, race realist, Jewish aware, counter Zionist, authoritarian, it said Hitler was awesome, blah, blah, blah. So basically, it goes through everything, all the same speaking points that everybody's said, including, questioning the Holocaust number, which the Yad Vashem has already called that number into question. I have video of Francis Piper, which is the leader of Yad Vashem, questioning their own number. So this is already, so this Senate resolution here rides on the heels of Nick Fuentes' mainstream debut, and it outlines everything he said because it weaponizes this bill against anybody who stands for resistance against Zionism. So this rolls in all the mega movement, it rolls in the Free Palestine movement, and basically anybody that uses a platform to speak out against Israel can now be targeted. And this bill begins to set up the foundation for that. That's what this is. And it outlines all of these things. So that's the thing, is like, this bill it acts as a legal document. So even though none of this stuff was ruled on in court, or there was no jury, all of this stuff is going to go down as historical fact in here. And see, that's the thing, is like, now that Nick Fuentes went on, it gave him all this cannon fodder for the things that are obvious. Like, we all do believe that dual loyalty is fucking harmful, that Jewish Americans that are Israel first should not be in our government. And it's like, there are no issues with that. So it's not surprising that Chuck Schumer, a dual citizen, an Israeli first American politician, penned this Senate resolution immediately on the heels of Nick Fuentes' Piers Morgan debut. Because it's all the same shit, Nick Fuentes got Zionist money somewhere, whether he knew it or not, to put together his podcast. And somebody in the Zionist organization put together the debut on Piers Morgan because they knew it was going to incite further anti-Semitism. And that brings us into Theodore Herzl, Zionism and anti-Semitism. Yeah, dude, right? So it's like faces to add to the Epstein files, but they're never going to actually implicate anybody. They're implicating people, but everybody's waiting for this smoking gun, before they're actually going to do anything, which is just insanity. But so basically this article, it's from Israelis and Zionist Jews, and they basically talk about how Zionism uses anti-Semitism. So Herzl indeed concluded the European opposition to Judaism was permanent, incurable, and dangerous. Because remember, Herzl's a chief propagandist. What polarized Herzl before the Dreyfus affair? Herzl was a secular Jew. He pretended to not give a fuck about Israel, or, well, not Israel, because Israel didn't exist yet. There were people immigrating to Israel, but it didn't exist yet. But he acted as a secular Jew. He pretended he had no skin in the game. But his turning point was apparently the Dreyfus affair, which is also propaganda. Dreyfus was charged at 2 different times, years apart, and convicted both times. But we are taught that it's anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that Dreyfus was charged. But no, if you look up the Card of Affairs, Dreyfus and the Freemasons, all that shit's implicated in it. But apparently Herzl was polarized by the Dreyfus affair, and that's when he had his oh shit moment. Now we need to like crack down on this, and that was his time. But Herzl indeed concluded European opposition to Judaism was permanent, incurable, and dangerous. But Herzl did not establish political Zionism solely in reaction to it, nor merely as a vehicle to establish a Jewish state. There are those people who do not understand us properly and think the goal of our efforts is to come back to our lands. Our ideal goes further than that. Our ideal is great eternal truth. But really, it's a land grab. Indeed, Herzl planted the seeds of Jewish transformation. He stunned Baron Hirsch in spring of 1895 by arguing the primary misfortune of Jews during centuries of exile was not persecution, but rather the lack of united political leadership. So how do you drive people to unite? That's where he's going with this. Anti-Semitism is their vehicle for unity. If we had such leadership, we could tackle the solution of Jewish question. From above, from below, from all sides, Herzl argued. And so, Herzl embarked on his journey to establish political leadership that would embetter the Jews, shepherd them through the exodus from Europe, both physical and spiritual, and then represent their interests long after the Jewish state has been established. But Herzl quickly identified the primary hurdle to Zionism, the same one that Moses faced, the Jews' complacency. So, the hurdle wasn't anti-Semitism. The hurdle was the Jews' complacency. So because, and what he means by Jews' complacency, we will observe that right here. Herzl observed how emancipated European Jews acquire more property, learn to turn blind eye to occasional slurs such as dirty Jew, and are more addicted to the flesh pots of Europe, as Herzl called them. So you see that he's bashing the lifestyle of assimilated Jewry. And that's always been the case. Those shortness of spirit Jews were certainly not ready to embark on an exodus. Old prisoners do not willingly leave their cells, Herzl noted. It seems Herzl was on the verge of giving up, but then astonishingly, he was able to put together the loose pieces to identify the propelling force that would unite Jews and lead them to the promised land. Anti-Semitism. Like, fucking, come on. He wrote in his diary, anti-Semitism contains the divine will to make good because it forces us together. Pressure unites us. And this unity will make us free, he told his friend Max Nordau. Anti-Semitism turned us into Jews. Understanding this foundational aspect of Herzl's philosophy allows us to apply it to contemporary opposition to Judaism. Such age-old opposition is now funneled through Zionism. The alarming rise of the Israel-bashing fashion is rapidly turning into the propelling force that draws Jews into Zionism. Once again, Jews who might have nothing to do with Israel are pushed together by external pressures, which forces more of their Jewish identity to be intertwined with Zionism. In theory, there could have been an alternative approach to Israel bashing, of which the boycott, divestment, sanctions, the BDS movement, escape from Zionism. One argue that being Jewish does not mean that he or she is Zionist, but here again, Herzl proves relevant, having concluded that such escape is illusory and even laughable. In Herzl's time, some Jews opted to baptize into Christianity as a way to escape anti-Semitism. Herzl observed that the only thing such action would accomplish is that the slur word would change to dirty convert, a prediction that tragically turned true decades later in dirty converts, dirty Jews. Indeed, throughout history, no matter what form opposition to Judaism took, escape routes were only illusory. So, but as we see, anti-Semitism turned us into Jews. And then, so now we look at Jay Schottenstein, who prints the Talmud, who also owns American Eagle, who also has ties to Rabbi Pinto, who has ties to Kanye, who has ties to Euro Goldman and Lev Tuhur. So here is another exhibit in a drive in anti-Semitism. So if you ever encounter a paywall, to disable the paywall, inspect the element, go to your settings, disable JavaScript, and refresh the page. What's going on here? Here we go. All right. So basically, Jay Schottenstein, he is using the Sydney Sweeney campaign to drive up anti-Semitism because they are trying to unite the Jews. They're trying to unite all Jews under the Zionist flag. That's the goal. That is the age-old goal, and they're never going to be finished with that goal until every single Jew falls under the Zionist flag, and that might never be the case. There's always going to be factions that go against it. But that's the goal. That's the whole goal with the rise in anti-Semitism in North America and the world, is to force unity of the Jewish population under the Zionist flag. To take people that are vehemently against Zionism, to Jews that are vehemently against it, to make them feel so uncomfortable in the country that they live that they have no other choice than to fall under the flag of Zionism. That's literally what all this is. That's what everything is. You know, yes, there are fucked up things happening, and yes, there are Jews that are behind the wheel of those fucked up things happening, but there's other people too, you know? And it's important to differentiate between, you know, the Jews that are carrying out these activities and the Jews that are not, because there are Jews that are Jews by birth because of Theodore Herzl's definition of a mother being, you know, whatever. And they'll never escape it. So, but that's really what I wanted to discuss today, is how the rise in anti-Semitism is being platformed. Why these accounts that have a huge following, they're being platformed because there's a desire to push anti-Semitism. And like, yes, there are fucked up things happening, but the goal is to take the focus off the people that are perpetuating the atrocities and to take that and spread it over the entire Jewish community. So with that, I'm going to now go offline, but I just wanted to come on and clarify that for the day. Something I wanted to talk about last night, and this bill is a bunch of BS. And you have individual members in your community that are passing similar bills. So this is more propaganda here. So using the Yad Vashem planted narrative of the Holocaust to give Holocaust education of our children to external Zionist entities. That's what all of this is. So this is why I'm never going to vote again, because somebody I voted for pushed this fucking bill through in Wisconsin, and it makes me sick. So, but on that note, anti-Semitism is a Jewish psyop. It's a Zionist psyop, and I urge you all to investigate more. So I'll post the whole video when I'm done, and I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'm out.